Okay, folks, we're going to get started in about 2 minutes. If you want to come back to the tables and have a seat. If you're a panelist, come on down.
All right, so I think we're going to get started. If any of you would like to join us, we will get started. And we'll get started. Excellent. We will pose for pictures and autographs afterwards, apparently. So thank you guys for giving us the opportunity to talk and answer some questions today. Hopefully we answer some questions that you guys have and have an opportunity to share. I thought I'd start off with some introductions. My name is Paul. No. My name is Jeff. I am, my official title, it doesn't matter what my official title is. I call myself an agile magician. And I joined Manulife a couple of months ago, so I am helping out as an agile magician at Manulife. I thought maybe we'd introduce some people on the panel, and I thought I'd start it at the far end over here with John. I made some notes here. So John is actually the owner of a company called Interconcepts. He is doing a bunch of work for another company called Solstice, where he is currently working for another company called TELUS. And he is helping out as a product owner on one of their teams. He has a computer science degree from the University of Essex, which is why he sounds funny when he talks. And I tried to find an interesting fact about John, which I didn't find interesting, but others might. But John loves seeing how different pieces of information all fit together. It was one of the things that I've known John for a few years, unfortunately, and it's one of the things that sticks out is just how John loves to see how things that are totally apparently unrelated are actually truly related when you actually start to look at them. So then we have Jill, and John's going to answer some really tough questions tonight. He said, Jeff, I'd like to answer the toughest questions tonight. You have anything you want to add? No? Okay, perfect. This is going to be a great panel. You're going to listen to me talk. So what do you think about that, John? It's good. Next up, we have Jillian. Jillian is a director at Scotia. Yes, see that? I knew that. And I again made some notes on here. Background in engineering from MIT. So we've got some smart people over here because I don't have a degree from MIT or Essex, not even York. Anyone from York here? Did I just alienate a bunch of people? Yes. All right. Thank you. Jillian was actually one of the original founders of the AgileTO Meetup and was instrumental in organizing it and getting it going very early on before she stepped back to do other things. One thing that I love about Jillian that I'm going to share is her absolute passion and love for games. We're going to talk about games in a little bit, but I know that'll come up. But Jillian spent time at Agile Games in Boston and at Play for Agile, which is in Cornwall in September. And I think there are still tickets available for that. There might be a more shameless plug coming for that a little bit later. Anything you want to share with everyone about yourself? You got them? All right. Oh boy, this is going to be a tough panel. Let's jump down to the far end here. And at the far end, we have Travis. So now Travis is a partner at Bertie Consulting. If you're not familiar with that name, I'd be incredibly surprised because I think most of us have our CSM or CSPO from Bertie Consulting. But Bertie does more than just certifications. They do a lot of consulting and a lot of engagement work where Travis spends a lot of his time working with the executive and leadership team. He's also a big fan of something called Kanban, which is like Scrum but different.
It's more magical.
It's more magical. There we go. He also writes on a blog, Agile Advice. Agile Advice is the blog.
Yes.
And it's a fantastic blog worth reading. I do, and some lots of great content. Lots of great content there. Now, in my interest of finding something interesting, I do want to come back to you. Actually, I wanted to do you last here because there was something interesting I found on your bio that I want to ask you about that sort of sets you apart from probably the rest of us up here. So we'll come back to that. But before we do that, right beside me here is Gil. Gil has a background in R&D, software development, and has been working for founder of 3P Vantage Communications and Consulting. I made up the last part. It sounds good though. Most of the last part is made up. He's worked with a whole pile of different companies, different sizes of industries, from the smallest things to the largest things you can possibly imagine. And he's written 2 books. And I think we're going to put a plug in for both of those books because they are exceptional books. And Gil has offered that if you would like, he will autograph them if you buy them tonight. Okay, it's possible he didn't offer that, but I'm offering that on his behalf. I'm good at making stuff up. Excellent. So anything you want to add? Anything that I missed or got wrong? Okay. So Travis, there was something interesting on your bio, and it talks about you being in the ballet. Yeah. So how did you go from ballet to consulting in software engineering and in Agile and in Kanban?
I just fell off the stage.
That happens.
Yeah.
That happens. Okay. Oh, this is going to be great. Don't worry. We offer full refunds. You'll get back everything you paid. All right, so listen, nobody put up any questions, which is great, because now I get to go through the questions that I have for these folks. And but if there are questions that come up along the way, I'm going to encourage you guys to just yell them out or throw something at them, and they will answer. But I thought I would start with one question, and that is kind of, I'm going to open it up to the 4 of you and let you guys decide who would like to start here. But we've talked a little bit about Scrum tonight. We've talked a little bit about what's in the Scrum guide. There's a lot of questions about what's actually in the mindset required to move to Agile. I'm curious from your perspectives, how did you guys get into working in an Agile environment? Anyone, that's fine.
Okay, I'll start.
Go for it.
I was tricked. No, so the company I was working with was helping other customers convert to using Agile processes, so I thought I'd better learn something about it. And yeah, you quickly realize when you get into it that it is definitely a mindset, and I remember after my CSM training at Bertie, because that's what we all have to do, I wrote a blog post called Why Agile Works, because I realized very quickly that the mindset kind of is about allowing for people to be people, and sort of tries to face reality in a way that traditional sort of command and control, we can predict the future, mechanisms don't. So that's sort of how I fell into it.
Cool.
So how I got into Agile, I was made a manager, and I had previously worked for other managers, and so I learned a lot of what not to do. So once I got my team, I said, okay, we're not doing that Gantt thing anymore. Instead, we're just going to work from short lists, and let's meet every day. We were not standing, we were sitting, and then we had a product manager, and I said, hey, we should probably talk to the guy. One day, my VP caught me in the hallway talking to the guy and read me the riot act, so I guessed I was doing something right. And then I realized it had a name. And the rest is history. That was 18 years ago.
So I started out as a project manager, and like John, I went to have my CSM training with Bertig. And then I was at a PMI event, very similar to this, and I heard Gil speak. And one of the things that Gil spoke about, I think even at that time, it was about agile mindset. Is it possible? Yes. Probably. And what really struck me is that it was really hard to predict delivery, and so I wanted to start applying at least an iterative approach to software delivery in the work that I was doing. And over time, I got to work with more and more agile teams. I mean, in terms of not more teams, well, more teams, but also more agile teams. So.
I've got one.
You got one.
I've got one.
All right.
Yeah. Excellent. You want to add anything on? You don't have to. Okay. So the topic we're going to go into now that we've got a bit of a background as to who's sitting up here and the expertise and how long people have been doing these things and where they've come from and how they fell into it or fell off the stage into it, is opening it up to you guys as well as my own questions that I've sort of written down in case nobody here had questions. But really we're looking for what we call patterns and anti-patterns. So when we talk about patterns, we're talking about the good things that happen in an organization. We're talking about the things that help us deliver software faster, sooner to our customers, get better return on our investment, solve customers' problems. Those are the things that lead us into good patterns that enable all of those things. And when we talk about anti-patterns, we're talking about patterns that exist that perhaps don't have such positive impacts and don't have such positive consequences, yet are patterns that we see in organizations. So if you guys have any questions on something you've seen in an organization, there's a good chance that you're not the only one who's seen that. There's a good chance that with the experience that's sitting up here right now, that they've probably seen something as well. And I'd love to get them to be able to explain what are some things they've done to amplify the patterns. What are some things they've been able to do to take the good things that are going on and make more of them? And what are the things that have happened that haven't been so good, those anti-patterns, and what have they done to try and dampen those things as they go on? So maybe I'll start, and Travis, since you didn't ask the last one, and since no one's putting their hand up, I'm going to start with you maybe if I could. And I'd love it if you could tell me maybe about what let's always start, it's always easy to start with the negative, right? What are the problems? So maybe you can tell me about one of the biggest problems or the biggest challenges that you've seen in an organization where you've been consulting.
I would say internal focus rather than customer focus. If we're focused on our customers, then we're concerned about how to serve them. We have a service orientation, and it informs all of the work that we do together. And that, more than anything, allows an organization to overcome impediments, focus on quality, collaboration. It tends to happen organically rather than with other less organic ways of doing it.
So how have you guys seen that manifest in an organization? I know, John, you've got some experience where teams have had some difficulties getting things done, and it's not necessarily anything the team can do. Some of those anti-patterns that Travis has mentioned, we've seen in organizations. Can you share how you've seen that manifest and what the impact has been when organizations are focused internally rather than externally?
Well, yeah, I mean, teams focused on just building whatever they're being told to build as opposed to building something that the customer really wants or that's really going to solve a problem. As a consultant, I've been in with agile teams showing up at customers and just doing what we've been told because that's what we're there to do. But, you see the people who are writing the stories and deciding what to do, and you sort of ask questions like, why are we doing this? And do you think this is actually going to something the customer wants? And there are usually no clear answers to that question. We tend to keep customers as far away as possible from people in the enterprise, usually.
So maybe Jillian, if you want to go next, and you're allowed to pass, by the way. I should have made that rule clear up at the front. But maybe if you want to go next, when you've seen these types of things going on in organizations, what are some things that you've tried to do to highlight this to leadership, to teams, to anybody involved in the system.
So we're talking about customer focus
Yeah.
versus a team-based focus.
Yeah.
One thing that I've seen work really well is having, I've once worked with a team at a small startup here in Toronto called Oanda, and it was a currency exchange trading company. And one of the things that worked really well was that the first Scrum team there, the developers were really customer focused. Every week, they would get, so their goal was to produce a new piece of software so people could sign up and start trading in minutes and rather than days. And every week, they would get a report from the business about how many people they actually converted. And to me, this was like the most customer-focused Agile team I've ever seen. But one practice that we did was we had other teams drop in and observe this team. So sometimes you might not have customer focus in your organization, or but you might have it in an adjacent team. And sometimes just showing other people is a great way to expose them to it.
Cool. I've still got one.
All right.
Thanks. You get to keep that one.
May I add?
Absolutely.
So another way of saying this is that if you don't understand your customers, what they need and why they need it, then basically everything in this Scrum game goes in the potential impediments category.
Okay.
So one of the ways I've
Thank goodness.
one of the ways I've kind of so as a product owner, like
Yeah.
it really is your job to try and talk to the customers. And so one of the things I've been trying to do is I'm following a pattern I'm going to call bypass the stakeholder. So stakeholders like to meet with people and then come and meet with you and tell you what's needed. And so I asked the question, can I please be in? Do you mind inviting me to the meeting? I'll just listen in, and I won't say anything. And then when you've been there for a while, you say a couple of things, and eventually you kind of take over a little bit that relationship sometimes, because I think it becomes apparent to the customer. And when I say customer, I'm talking about internal customers in this case. So people inside the organization who need whatever it is you're building. It might be a little harder to get to outside customers in this way, but for internal customers, I think you can kind of insert yourself into the relationship a bit and start asking questions and answering questions. So when people say, well, why does this work like this? Or why are we doing this? And you answer it, they start to see you as kind of a trusted person who's going to give them the straightforward answer. And then they might start emailing you, etc. And now you have a relationship with the internal customer a little bit. And that's been working for me a little bit.
Cool.
I have something to add to that. When people have to prioritize work, that's when they're faced with, is this going to matter more than that? And the follow-on question is, how will we know? So as long as everything is necessary, and there is a schedule and fixed scope and everything, nobody has to choose. But if you look at most of the planning mechanisms that we have, either in Scrum or in Kanban or basically any variation of Agile thinking, you still have to choose. And you choose almost on a case-by-case basis. So you're forced to ask yourself, what difference will this make? And what difference will that make? How does this drive risk down? And how does the other thing drive risk down? And then you're able to make smarter decisions.
Yeah, and passing on that question to the internal customer or the stakeholder is an interesting exercise, because making them choose makes them say, well, why do I have to choose? Well, you only have a certain amount of time. And then when they're making that choice, you can ask, well, why are you making that choice? Which helps you understand more why you're doing what you're doing, or why they think you should do what you're doing.
So that leads perfectly into a fantastic segue into another anti-pattern that I'm sure we've all seen. And that's that when we ask a stakeholder or our customer, the person paying our bills, to prioritize something, there could be option A, B, C, and D that needs to get done. And we're asking the stakeholder or customer which one they would like us to work on, which one's going to have the bigger impact. And their answer is all of them. I can't launch this product without these 4. How do you respond to those questions?
Well, I like to meet them where they are. So I might say, okay, we're not going to release anything unless all 4 of them are ready. But just in case, humor us. If we could ask a few people after doing the first one, what do you guys think of that? Did we do something useful here? Do you have other ideas for us? Feedback, right? Which one should we do first? What do you think? Or if they're having a hard time choosing, which one should we do last? And we work our way back from that. Now, we do this a few times and they realize, well, hold on, you did the first one, can't we release it? And now you did the second one, can we release that too? And before you know it, it becomes a habit. No, before you know it, it's not that quick. Still.
So that's a great way to prioritize when we've got a backlog of things and we've got to do that. But I've got a customer, let's just say another anti-pattern, sort of in the same vein, Travis, that I'm hoping you can help me with, where the customer has a backlog of they're using Jira for their backlog, and they've written out their MVP. Now, their minimum viable product that they need to deliver for this brand new product, so it's not an enhancement, brand new product that they're going to deliver, and they've written out just enough to deliver their MVP. So in Jira, they have determined that they have 378 stories that need to be delivered, and they're wondering when are they going to be ready? When are they going to be delivered? I'm wondering how you might answer a question like that.
Sorry, what's Jira?
It's like a version of Rally,
So it's like a race.
or like Pivotal Tracker, or
Yeah. Okay, so it's like nerd stuff.
it's
Okay.
backlog management tool.
All right, cool. So, well, does Jira track historical data?
It does, as a matter of fact.
So then that's your answer.
Okay, so let's assume
Let me
that.
say a little bit more though,
Thank you.
because you didn't seem very satisfied with that answer.
Well, I was going to say, imagine I'm an executive or
Okay.
someone who's about this new to this agile world, and I'm used to getting my Gantt charts and my work breakdown structure with my critical path, so I can understand how tasks are going to be sequenced, because I've done that all through Microsoft Project, and I can predict using Microsoft Project that I am going to be done in January 2019.
Great.
How does Agile work with that when you're only going to do 1 or 2 things at a time?
So, this is great. I feel like I'm on like the TAC panel or something. I'm trying to get my CST approval. So let's see. What's a good answer for this? There's a lot of potential answers. So one is don't expect it to be any different now that you're doing Agile, because, well, where does Agile start and where does it end in your delivery system? When you start working on those product backlog items, how long have they already been in the product backlog for? And when they go into that product backlog and they're sitting there and waiting is that product backlog a bounded queue? Do you have any bounded queues?
No.
So then you don't expect it to be any different.
Maybe
Because unlimited whip is still unlimited whip, whether you're doing Agile or not.
So maybe can you just tell us a little bit more about what you mean when you say an unbounded queue?
An unbounded queue is where it's like a bag of holding. Have you ever heard of a bag of holding?
I have a bag of holding.
Yeah, you do? Yeah,
do.
because you're a magician.
I am.
That's a magician thing. So a bag of holding is like a little bag, right? But you can put an infinite number of things into it. It never gets full. So you can reach into your bag of holding and pull out like a chicken. Or, next time you reach in and you pull out like a scarf or like a bag of golf clubs. And you just, hey, what do I need now? Where's that thing, right? And yeah, or you pull a bag of holding out of the bag of holding, and you're right. It's like Russian dolls. So this is basically what I mean by an unbounded queue. So everything that's in the backlog is like a bag, or a backlog is an unbounded queue is like a bag of holding, and most backlogs are unbounded queues, because those are where we put all of our promises. Right?
So one of the things that often contributes to that is the inability for teams when a stakeholder or a customer asks them, hey, can you build this? We always say, sure, no problem, we'll add it to our backlog. Jillian, I'm wondering if you have any insight that you can share from what you've seen on teams where they've actually been able to say no instead of just continually adding things to a backlog. Or how have you seen that? How have you seen that manifest itself?
How about later?
Okay,
Sorry, can I just add one little thing?
sure.
So the reason why bags of holding have such a huge impact, and why Agile tends to have very little, is that these little bags of holding are kind of everywhere. They're like between teams, before teams, after teams, and they're like these infinite queues that show up all the way throughout a delivery system. And most of the time, that work is in the system, it's in those unbounded queues. So teams can be going super fast in between those unbounded queues, but the unbounded queues are still unbounded, and therefore the system as a whole is unbounded.
So Jillian, you had an idea on I just asked you the question about, how do you deal with it when customers and stakeholders come out, and you said, how about later? Well, how about now? No, I know that was.
Or how about a list? So I'm just going to jump into some thoughts.
Yeah.
So very often we have back to unbounded queues with Travis. One way to deal with lots of stuff is to split it up. And this brings me back to thinking about story splitting techniques that you can use. And it also makes me think about some of the we had talked about games a little bit earlier as well. So I'm thinking that if you have a product owner that's trying to prioritize or a team that's trying to prioritize what to do, some of the things that you could use to demonstrate with lower stakes than your actual backlog is to try sharing something like the product owner value game, which we've actually played here last year. I believe there's also an innovation game where you can actually use play money to bid on
Buy a feature.
Buy a feature.
Yep.
So I think there are ways to maybe show the concept and do it in a lower stakes way, so that people can experience the actual psychological movement rather than with their high stakes features right away.
Cool, nice place to start. John, did you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to, the way I've been doing this is I don't keep anything much in my backlog. Tend to write stories just before planning, maybe for the current epic. So I might have a couple of weeks of stories in the backlog. Backlogs are a terrible place to keep ideas. They're a messy list of things that, the bag of holding you can't look at and go, oh yeah, we're building a whatever. So, typically I'll use sort of an epic list, a prioritized epic list, and the epics try and keep them small. If they're more than a few stories, I'll build a storyboard around that epic idea and keep it as small as possible. And I don't build MVPs with stories. That doesn't really make any sense. If you're going to write 378 stories, by the time you've finished writing story 378, you could have probably finished the first 50, and on top of that, everything's changed by the time you get to story 100. So what's the point? I don't like wasting. I'm very lazy as a product owner. I don't write stories till the team's about to consume them, or I don't finish them till the team's about to consume them.
Cool. I'm going to take a minute just to check in with everybody here. What questions do you guys have at this point? Yes, we have a question. 2 questions. Okay. We are going to manage the whip, and we will do one at a time, if that's okay. I think Tom has broken it. That's okay. Go ahead and ask it. I'll repeat it.
So, I've noticed one thing about Agile. Like, nobody talks about that thing. It's a very simple thing. People call it money. And I think that the reason why people use this concept of bottomless bag or things which you pull out for granted because of that. Like people try to pull something because they think it doesn't cost anything. It's just like for free because it's bottomless, right? I think that this is huge policy that people assume that this thing shouldn't be counted. I mean, like, shouldn't be forecasted. I don't know how to call it, how to explain it. People do not consider money when they talk agile.
Okay. So let me.
First, it's just the concept for discussion.
Cool. Let me do that one first, okay? But before I do, I should clear up a couple things about bags of holding. For those of you who don't know, you cannot put a bag of holding inside a bag of holding. You can't put a non-dimensional space inside another non-dimensional space. In addition, you cannot put live things in there. So chickens, unfortunately, you can't pull out unless the chicken is dead. And the third thing is you actually can't put sharp objects in there because it can actually puncture the non-dimensional space. It can. Swords, for example, can damage non-dimensional spaces. So now that we've cleared that up, we can move on to your question, which is about Agile and money in particular, and that when we talk about Agile, there is not, correct me if I get this wrong, but there's not a huge talk about the money aspect of Agile, and that forecasting out and planning out and how we're going to spend the money and return on investment.
I just mean when people start pulling things out.
Yep.
When they
Okay, the mics should be working now.
realize how much does it cost.
Yep.
This pulling process stops immediately.
Okay. So once.
This scarf
Yep.
cost $1 million. Uh-oh.
Yep.
Or it's just like for free.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different. And like I will.
There's a great cartoon which is a software developer talking to a product owner, and the product owner says, "I want you to build an application for me," and the software developer says, "Sure." The product owner says, "I want it to be able to I want it to be able to identify where the photo was taken so that I can track if the picture was taken of a bird. I want it to automatically tag which national park it was taken in." And the developer goes, "Sure, no problem. I can do that in a couple days." And the product owner says, cool. "I'd also like it to be able to identify what species of bird it is." And the developer says, "Give me an unlimited budget in 5 years and I might be able to come up with something." There's a fine line between something that's plausible and practical today and something that costs a huge amount of money. And you're absolutely right. We don't always take that into account when we're planning our backlog. I have a sneaking suspicion that Travis wants to add something to this, so I'm going to let him continue on.
Yeah, the second question, while I remember it, okay?
Okay.
The second question is, from my personal experience, I learn better from something bad than from something good.
Yep.
The question is, have you ever had, any of you, an experience when, I tend to call it project, but it's probably wrong, something where you use Agile failed because you used Agile?
Yep.
So it was inappropriate usage of Agile, not wrong usage of it. Like you did everything properly, like fine, but the fact that you used Agile instead of whatever, I don't know, waterfall, whatever it is, like anything different. So the cause of this was the fact that you used Agile.
Okay.
That's the second question.
Let's start with the money question. Okay?
Well, you can kind of combine them by saying that, like, okay, so you can be really great at Agile, but leave like all kinds of $1 million scarves in your bags of holding for an infinite amount of time. You can be really agile at delivering shitty scarves.
You guys want to add anything to that?
Well,
I mean, that's pretty good, right?
yeah, I mean that kind of goes. I mean that's why I don't put too much in the bag of holding, right? Because if we want to make sure we're putting the expensive stuff, the easy to achieve stuff in first and getting that done. so that we're delivering the value quickly. But I usually just end up playing the Agile from a product owner's perspective, Agile in a nutshell. That video from
Heinrich Nieberg, fantastic video, by the way, if anyone hasn't seen it. Best 16 minutes you can watch on the internet. It's called Product Owner in a Nutshell by Heinrich Nieberg. It's a beautiful animated cartoon. Best thing you can watch in the world.
Yeah, I watch it every so often to remind myself how it's supposed to work, and part of that video, there's which one should I do first, this one or this one? Well, this one's high value and low cost, I should do it first. So, this one's high value and high cost, I'll do that one after.
I think at the crux of the question too, and I may be reading too much into this a little bit, is that the idea that Agile is going to solve all of our problems. I don't know, Gil. Maybe if you have a thought, and you're like I say, you're allowed to pass, or Jillian if you want to. But the question is, does Agile solve any of our problems? Does using Agile guarantee success?
Yes. Not.
But why not? Isn't it a silver bullet?
Okay. It's an unbounded question.
It is a loaded question. I said I wasn't going to do any loaded questions, and this is one.
Fair enough. Look, you have to use it in situations where it's appropriate. It's appropriate for complex change, ambiguous work where you rely on people, where there is change, where there is a customer that you can have some immediate relationship with, where you can make a difference to them and whatnot. And especially when the quality and value of the the eventual product is, you cannot determine that ahead of time. Okay, so that's where it's useful. Is it a silver bullet? No, it's not. And for all the big talk about Scrum and whatever, these teams work inside of organizations, and organizations have additional things to worry about, and nothing is ever perfect. Is Agile generally better than our traditional responses to product development? Well, again, in the situations where it is in fact indicated for, generally yes. Easy? No. You can definitely use Agile really well to produce a whole lot of low-hanging fruit that is absolutely useless, but it was easy to build and forecast.
Yep.
So I found the first question very interesting, the money question, because in my experience, it's often the other way. You've been in the situation where story points actually become dollars points, and then
183 points per sprint, man.
Yeah. Right, and then I guess you start to see things being prioritized based on the number of points allocated. I mean, that's a consideration sometimes, but when you can tell that they're thinking in their heads, okay, this is costing me X dollars, and then that's the primary consideration, I guess it's a pattern then that sort of might not lead to the best quality software, for example.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, if you have to choose between competing options and one of them is going to cost you a lot more, better be worth it. Now, I'm not saying that you need to estimate accurately and be able to foresee and estimate everything properly, but like any one of us, when we want to buy something, a service or a product, we also compare based on price. It's not just about the absolute value, and that's a legitimate concern.
Yeah, it also goes back to this question of who are your customers, right? And then that can be divided into customer segments, and now you're thinking strategically about managing the risk in terms of what you're actually making promises to deliver on.
So we've talked a little bit about, I'm going to just change it up a little bit here. We've talked about some anti-patterns that we've seen, because those are the easy ones and the fun ones to start with. But there's a lot of good things that we've seen as we've been out coaching and interacting with teams and organizations. Maybe I'd love to start, Gil, if you're up for it. Maybe tell me about one of the best, most happiest, funnest environments, teams, projects you've had the pleasure, opportunity to work on.
Without naming names.
Without naming names.
Well, I've had several. So, I'm...
Well, pick one.
Well, pick one. Well, it's a group of over 100 people. They're in the city, generally enjoying what they do, and they've had a transformation, and so far they're in their 4th year. Things are generally going well. they're in an organization with a mission that makes a difference to all of us, and they emphasize lots of good things that work for the employees and for the stakeholders, us, the audience. And if I weren't a consultant, which I'm really happy being, I would probably work there.
That's a pretty strong endorsement.
Fair enough. Sorry.
Yeah, let me see. I'm gonna see if Jillian can weigh in here on what she's seen contribute to that sort of success. If you're up for it, for a team that you've seen where they've been contributing and they've got a strong mission, what are some of the underlying factors that you've seen that have enabled a team to get to that level?
I'd say true consensus. So one example would be, I'm sure that a lot of you will do sprint planning, and you get to the end of the sprint planning, and you're all set to go. You've got your items in Jira or whatever it is, and the team is about to start on the sprint. How many people actually check that the whole team is on board with starting the sprint with what's in there? Great.
And where the answer isn't obviously yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I find it really valuable to use something as simple as like a fist of 5, where you just go 1, 2, 3, and then someone gives a number. And it's a really great way to check how on board everyone at the table is to that particular sprint goal. And sometimes you might find, like I've seen it where one person on the team is 5 and most other people are like 2s or 3s, and then it gives us a chance to have a conversation about how we might adjust the sprint. And that's given me I've seen some better results there.
Cool. John, you had something to add as well?
Well, just talking about patterns that that have worked well for teams I've worked with and where we've had better success. And to your point about bad experiences, like I had lots of those where I've looked back and thought, could have done that differently. But even when it's gone really well, we've often produced great software that's been really great, and it's delivered to a company who then doesn't do a great job of marketing or selling it, or and then so there's only so much you can optimize, and when you look back, you realize you've kind of locally optimized. But in terms of a pattern in organizations that I think has worked, that we overlook a lot, that just work well for me is one team, one code base, or one code base, one team. If you've got lots of groups trying to dip into the same code base, then I think you run into a lot of problems. And I think we forget about that sometimes. And I hear lots of stories about teams who are all trying to dip in, and I get to touch everything in the layer cake all the time, even though that's actually a series of multiple products. In reality, it's it's not been divided up very well, and so everyone's trying to have a dip in, and they wonder why they can't sort of optimize every sprint, and why they can't improve their own mechanisms of working and their own quality of code, because a lot of times somebody else is coming along and playing with that same code base in a different way. So it's hard to establish norms around the code base and around how they work when lots of people are having a go. Gil disagrees with me, I think. No? Okay.
Travis, anything from your perspective that you've seen in some organizations that have been really positive?
Sure. So the best Scrum team that I've ever worked with started out as a group of people who were working together in an organization, a government agency actually, and they were fed up with their customers being dissatisfied with the level of service that they were providing, and their customers were actually so dissatisfied that these are other government agencies who were like, we've been waiting for this thing for years. We're going to start calling external private vendors because you guys suck. And so these people were just fed up, like their professional pride just couldn't take it anymore. And so they decided to essentially truly self-organize into a Scrum team. They found a room that they weren't supposed to use, and they used it anyways. They found a bunch of stuff that they weren't supposed to use, and they put it in there, and they used it anyways. And they started doing sprints, and they were just really serious about what they were delivering and who they were delivering it to. And after a few sprints, they were actually able to ship product to customers. And this was like an unheard of thing in the organization, and they won awards. And unfortunately, the I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
I think Stephen has a question.
Oh no, this sounds really great. I kind of see that we're drifting in the right direction, as it were. Thanks to Igor for bringing up the obvious, which happens to be money. And thank you. Somebody actually mentioned the word vendor, which was wonderful. Thank you. So the anti-pattern I'm curious about is the typical vendor versus purchaser relationship. I spent many years of my life on the vendor side, and so I'm kind of curious if there's anybody else in the room who is working for vendors right now.
There's an interesting
Now,
value.
I'm sorry, that was a very important comment. Could I just repeat that? Tom says that he is working against the vendor.
Let me clarify.
Please.
Somebody earlier, can't remember who it was, said that there are situations, maybe it was Gil, said there were situations where an agile approach was not the right one. And one of the prime examples in my experience is when you're dealing with vendors. And so organizations will be gung-ho to bring Agile into their organization, to adopt Agile, to be Agile. And then they come up against a vendor whose business model does not support Scrum, does not support an Agile stance. Even vendors that are internally themselves Agile, their business model is all about the statement of work and about charging according to an old model. And in many cases, it is not an appropriate place to use Agile. And so I'm being flippant about working against vendors, but I find that if you do try and force Agile into these situations, oftentimes you're going to wind up in a world of hurt.
If you're trying to solve a complex problem and you are iterating to solve that and you need to engage a vendor, why would you engage a vendor that is going to work in a way that defeats iterating through solving that problem? Yeah, there's lots of vendors that work that way.
Tom is itching to answer that question.
So there's a lot
But
about
fundamentally, corporations are not homogeneous. They're very much like a nest of 3 or 4 antagonistic armies fighting against each other. Now, having worked on the vendor side for a large number of years, I have a certain amount of sympathy for the vendors. 2 particular items we've been analyzing in the systems thinking TO Meetup. One is the Phoenix pay system for the federal government. And number 2, the eHealth Ontario system for, I guess, Ontario. And, well, it's a story of disaster, but people think that the victims are the employees of the federal government. And yes, of course, they are the victims. But in this particular case, the vendor was also a victim. I'm just wondering if there's anybody in the room who can actually speak to the issue from the vendor side. Tom has eloquently sketched out as to what a purchaser have to do. In other words, the purchaser has to have a hired gun sitting there around the table, ready to tear the throat out of the salesman who starts with the vendor bullshit. Mr. Chairman, is this what we're talking about?
So let me try and focus that into perhaps an answerable question. Certainly it's true, right? And we all experience things from both the vendor and client side. Conveniently, we have 3 people up here who do contract work and are in fact vendors to other organizations. So maybe, Gil, you can tell me a little bit about how you engage with a customer.
Sure. So yes, I am contracted to provide Agile services. And sometimes it's procurement who talks to me, and sometimes it's real people. And I prefer to work with the real people and have a real relationship because I do not compete over price. It is a little bit ridiculous to ask an Agile consultant, how long do you need to make us Agile? So I can quote you a course, but I can't tell you how many coaching days it's going to take. So I would love to work iteratively. They have no idea how to make that happen.
Reminds me when I go into the grocery store and they say, would you like some shopping bags? And I'm like, yes. And they say, how many? I'm like, I don't know. The right number to fit my groceries.
That's
You
exactly
work
that.
here all the time. I don't know how many bags I'm going to need.
Yeah, that's exactly that.
Right.
So
Yeah, because they're going to charge me for them. Yeah, money. Travis, do you approach it any differently? How do you approach it when
I
you're?
have a more general
Okay.
response. So whether you consider yourself a vendor or a customer or a service provider or a product organization, whatever you want to call it, if you're in business, then that means you have customers and they're paying for you to deliver a service. And if you're fortunate enough to be in such a situation, then the best thing to do is focus on your customers.
Stephen made reference to the Phoenix Pay project, which, by the way, I'm convinced will be an MBA case study at some point, probably not too soon. It's different from the Phoenix project, which is a book, which I would also encourage you to read. But the Phoenix Pay project is going to be absolutely a fascinating case study.
Apparently Jeff had something to say, and then Paul's going to...
I totally want to say this on Jeff's behalf. So the issue with vendors in particular, I'm very opinionated on this notion of vendors. I take my cues from Taichi Ono, the head of Toyota in the 70s, when he wanted to reinvent his organization to start delivering things on demand. Basically, rather than queuing up all of this warehouse stock that was waste, nobody's buying it, let's just build things on demand. But he had to work with his vendors. He had to train his vendors, saying, do not deliver 10,000 bumpers if we only have 500 orders. You know, we are going to tell you how many we need, and you are only going to deliver what we need. And he had to reinvent his organization as well as all of his vendors in order to be successful. And we are very slow to try the same thing. But we are at a stage right now where our vendors are dictating the limitations and the constraints on how fast we can go because they don't want to change their models. And I think this is doing us as an industry a major disservice when I, right now as an Agile coach, I go in and I train vendors on how to be Agile. But we are limited by their ability to get their heads out of the sand on this notion. So yes, vendors must learn to really be Agile, to provide an alternate service to those clients that want to be Agile. But for the ones that want to be waterfall, then provide a waterfall service. But ultimately, money talks. If you don't want to provide a service to an Agile organization because you want to stay waterfall, then those organizations those purchasers should go to other clients that do want to do things in an Agile way. Thanks, Jeff.
Cool. There's a whole story, and if anyone wants to talk about Toyota, I'm glad you brought it up. That I'm happy to talk about that because they totally changed their relationship model. How about we talk about something? How about a question, or if you guys don't, I do. But a question on something related to. Do you have a time? Do you have to go somewhere?
I'm just asking because this is only supposed to go to
8:30, right? So we've still got like 17 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have to leave early? You know, if you have to leave early, I won't be offended if you get up and leave. Seriously, if you have to leave. If you hate this conversation, I'm okay if you don't want to stay. But I'm hoping that we're going to get to something of value if you do. Well, you didn't have to quite do that. No, that's okay. We're coming.
Calling
It's
your
okay.
bluff.
It's okay. No. Seriously, right? Like that's what we're here for. So we are here till 8:30, right? It is 8:30? Okay. I'd love to focus in on something that most of us are working in teams and aren't necessarily dealing with procurement on a regular basis. So I'd love to know if there's a question that anyone has around that. If not, I do. But I think Eric does. And then you do. I don't have you. Pedro. Okay. Oh, and there's one over here too? All right, beautiful. 1, 2, 3. This is great. Go.
How do you guys measure stuff?
How do we measure stuff?
We get the stuff measurer. What stuff?
We are talking patterns, anti-patterns. We have been talking about value, deliver progress, in open question in terms of, you want to take it from the perspective of mindset, from the perspective of actual delivering value to clients. What type of metrics, what criteria you use to actually inform and actually have an engaging conversation with your customers in terms of the service that you're providing.
Well, everybody knows what I'm going to say.
Do you want to grab a mic and say it? Do it.
Sure. So, staying on this theme of customer focus, the most important things to measure are the things that are important to your customers. And the second most important things to measure are the things that enable you to provide the things that matter to your customers in the way that it matters to them.
Yeah, so it's outcome-driven metrics, right? Outcome-driven metrics. We good with that? Pedro?
Okay, so the question is, I'm trying to figure out what is for a group of people, organization that has teams, and I'm talking three people teams. If you go with a Scrum, if you go with Kanban, what kind of pattern you apply to get started?
Okay, so the question is, you've got 2 or 3 teams of 2 or 3 people each. What pattern do you apply? Do you use Scrum? Do you use Kanban? Do you use XP? Do you use SAFe? Okay. Anyone want to take a shot on this? I'll tell you one of the hardest things about saying, yeah, no problem, I'll be the moderator, is that I'm not supposed to have opinions on any of these things. I'm supposed to pass it off, but oh my God. Somebody please answer this question.
The only thing I would say is that I've noticed that everyone knows that a team that's too large is really not effective, and we kind of talk about bigger than 10 for sure is getting unmanageable. But one thing I've learned recently, which I didn't realize before, is that really small teams tend to be not really teams either. So it's kind of hard to get some of the value of consistent output and things like that with teams of 3. One person's away and everything goes wrong, and you tend to also get fewer sort of T-shaped or V-shaped people in teams of 3. It takes longer to people to share skills because there isn't that as much point when there's just 3 people. So I'm not quite sure why your teams are only 3 big would be my.
So let's assume that the teams are a little bit larger. Let's go. Do you guys would you come in and say you need to use the Scrum or you need to use Kanban?
Some patterns that I've seen work are synchronized sprints or synchronized delivery, so that this reduces the number of. So when everything ships at the same time, then it's easier to predict because you're not managing it all ad hoc. Something else that I've seen work well is just a escalation. So if you have 3 teams having scrums, then you have like a similar meeting, but with one person from each of those teams that are one of each of those smaller teams.
So it sounds like a couple of the answers that I've heard, if I kind of pick out a few things here, are understand why your teams are formed the way they are, understand if you've got the right skills on there to deliver the value, and figure out a way that you can get coordination happening regardless of which framework you're going to use.
Or you could just Spotify it.
Sure.
No, I'm just kidding. So I have a serious answer.
Oh, good.
All right. So who are your customers? What do they ask you for? What are they complaining about? What is the nature of demand? What is your capability to deliver that demand? And what is the design of your delivery system? And can you visualize it?
So it almost sounds like you're saying there's no one answer to just plug in.
No, it's a series of questions that you need to answer.
Perfect. There was one more down here, and then we're going to call it a night. But I'm not leaving, and I'm sure there's going to be drinks and stuff afterwards, so there will be lots of chance for more conversation. But there was one more question before we wrap it up tonight. You get the honor.
So what sort of advice would you give? Yeah, I don't really.
So,
What
it's
sort
okay.
of advice would you kind of give to, like I have a project team that I've been working with for quite some time, and we go into sprint planning meetings, the UI, UX designers there, the developers are there, the testers, everyone from the whole team is there. They're reading all the stories, they're getting it, asking questions, clarifying, estimating, and then they agree to some velocity, and at the end of every sprint, we never hit 0. And it's, at first you assume, okay, well, it's a team, they're just getting together, they're just finding the groove, but this has been going on for like a year. So I'm wondering, what is it that you can do to sort of figure out, well, what is the root cause and how to resolve that so that you can get as close to 0 as possible?
Great question.
Has the team discussed this?
Yes. So I guess a lot of it is, they go back to, well, when we originally estimated that, we didn't think about these complications, and then we didn't think that there were these many bugs, and the bugs, well, you just have to solve them within the sprint, and unless we start pulling bugs out of the sprint and saying, okay, well, bugs we're not putting
I'm hearing root cause analysis and, coming up.
Well, yeah.
Typical answer, they committed too much. Another typical answer, the way they work at a technical level, agile engineering, is not there, which means that they stumble on things, accrue technical debt, and so on. Another one is that they don't entirely understand what they're committing to build, and because they're forced to give numbers and predictions, that kind of puts them in a corner.
So would you
Three things happen, by the way, when you ask a software developer to give you an estimate. 3 things. 1 is they won't know, and 2, they'll give you an answer anyway.
Also, one question to consider maybe who is complaining about the folks not making the sprint goal?
So no one could hear it because he doesn't have a microphone, but there was a little voice over here that said, "Who actually cares?"
I have to deliver this to the client, so I'd like to stop.
There's your
delivering that
answer.
news.
What do you mean, I have to deliver this? Don't they have part of the responsibility?
Oh, well, I'm the face that goes to the client to say.
So bring those
"This
other
release."
faces with you.
Okay, so you're delivering story points to your client?
Depends on the client. Some don't actually see stories at all. We come up with the stories and the requirements. The ones that are involved in writing the stories, they do actually end up seeing points, and we tell them this is the velocity for the sprint, and this is how many stories you can decide to prioritize for the sprint.
I'm in the wrong business.
I'm sorry?
Okay.
Me in conjunction with the client?
So let me, I think there's more of a discussion to have there than we're going to have right now. I think there's some phenomenal discussion to have. But I'd love to wrap this up, if I could, with one final question just quickly to each of you. If you could, in 1 sentence or less, think about it, in 1 sentence or less, what would you tell yourself 10 years ago? What do you know now that you wish you had known 5, 10 years ago about working in an agile environment, or working with teams, or working with people in delivering complex work? Come on, nice easy question.
This is going to be the best job ever.
What's the one thing you wish you'd known 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that you now know that you wish you knew then?
Focus less on the right solutions and more on the right problems.
Someone should tweet that.
So I became independent 9 years ago, so this is a bit of an interesting time period to ask about. And I had my doubts, but in hindsight, I wish I had known this is so the right decision for me.
Cool, thank you.
check consensus. Also, check alignment with your leadership.
Don't get sucked into a panel with Jeff.
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't really know. I think try not to care more than your customers about their problems. Maybe.
Cool. Guys, thank you so much for participating, volunteering to come up here.
All right. If you guys wouldn't mind, before you leave, just tidy up the tables, put any empty cans and bottles and whatnot in the recycling bins over there. And I want to thank everyone for coming out. Another round of applause for our fabulous panel.